They said overtime again, an all too familiar phrase that had become a soft excuse she could tuck into the pocket of any evening and pull out when needed. Late meeting, won't be home till late, she said over the sink that morning, apron tied around her waist, as if she were off to a shift at the bakery rather than into the soft-lit orbit of after-hours charm. I believe her the first few times, because marriage is a map we draw together. We trace each other's routes and trust the landmarks. But maps fray, and routes get redrawn in the margins. That night the house hummed the way it always hums when one person is missing. The TV whispering a show she hated. The kettle sighing itself cold on the counter. I made a plate and ate alone because the ritual mattered more than the appetite. The plate was a small anchor to the ordinary. Around 11, when text came with peculiar lightness. Sorry, traffic. And then nothing. I felt the old thrum of curiosity that settles in the ribs like a nervous bird. I wanted to sleep and wake to an ordinary morning, to the smell of coffee and the clink of spoons. But curiosity is a dishonest friend. It keeps asking, keeps nudging until you follow. I told myself it was for closure. Spoiler. Closure rarely needs witnesses. What it needs is courage and an address. I waited until the house fell asleep, then followed her scent of laundry detergent and familiar perfume down the dark street to where her car was parked. It wasn't there. The lot that usually held her small sedan was a neat darkness. I stood for a moment, ridiculous and raw, until I saw headlights carving a path toward the curb, a late car, slowing, as if the driver knew exactly who they were hunting for. My pulse climbed with the car's approach. When it stopped, the door opened and there she was. Hair tucked low, coat pulled tight, the sort of tired smile people put on when they've been wined with compliments and bad decisions. Beside her, the driver's posture somehow felt proprietary, a casual, easy presence that seemed planned to be unremarkable, which made it far more sinister. I stayed back in the shadow of the hedges, every muscle tense. I had waited for the dramatic revelation, slamming doors, tearful confessions, a scene worthy of film. Real life doesn't always keep pace with films. He tipped his head and said something that made her laugh, a quiet, private sound that landed in the small of my spine like a knife. They exchanged a last cigarette, a last joke, and then he folded himself back into the driver's seat. She slid in beside him, and they shared a look like conspirators. The car eased away, taillights dwindling like little rubies. I followed them at a distance, the whole stretch of my body feeling like surveillance equipment I hadn't asked to own. They stopped at a stretch of town I did not know she frequented, a service road that leaned toward cheap hotels and late-night diners, a place that smells of fried dough and loneliness. He parked under a street lamp as if to be civic about it, and when he opened the passenger door for her, he half-turned and I saw the name stitched on the collar of his jacket, a small detail that felt absurdly like a brand. He tapped the roof almost affectionately, an action that belonged to lovers and chauffeurs and men who think they own the night. They walked into a doorway together, shoulders nearly touching. My chest constricted the way it does in a thunderstorm. I could have turned back then, could have preserved the last unbroken filament of respect. Instead, I kept my distance and watched the way they moved through the sliding glass door of a modest apartment block, how they navigated the security panel, with an ease that suggested familiarity. He pressed a fob, the light blinked green. There was no dramatic creak of a heart being split, only the quiet crime of normalcy shared between two people who had learned to make small, everyday things intimate again. I considered calling her, confronting them in the beige light of the hallway. But what would I say? "Hi, I followed you." The words wouldn't land like revelation. They'd sound like an invitation to humiliation. I watched him hold the door for her, as if he were giving her the role of a lady in a play he wrote. They disappeared inside. I circled the building, as if geography might offer leverage. The stairwell smelled faintly of bleach and perfume. The unit numbers marched by like a list of potential alibis. On the third floor, the door they entered was ajar by a hair's breadth, a gap that yawns open when someone forgets the small courtesy of a lock. A chance or a mistake. I didn't analyze it then. I acted. I eased inside the corridor with the furtive calm of a man who knows secrets are heavy and must be carried deftly. The apartment smelled like a life married to short dinners and long words. Aftershave, the tang of wine gone warm, a sweater too soft to be his. On the coffee table sat a takeout box with a restaurant sticker I recognized from where she'd insisted we eat as a celebration once upon a different life. Beside it, on top of a pile of magazines, lay a single house key with a tiny label. Her name. The label was childish, the sort of thing lovers use to disguise ownership and make small gestures feel monumental. My breath caught. It was the proof that atmosphere hates. Mundane objects bearing the weight of intention. I don't remember the exact sequence of what came next, the cocktail of rage and grief that rearranges time. But I remember the sound of the front door closing behind me, the staccato steps that had been practiced 1,000 times on the stairs to a relationship that had unknowingly been studied by 3 people. They were in the bedroom, a sound of fabric and breath. I stood at the threshold like someone reading a sentence in pencil and trying not to smudge it. When she saw me, her face folded through expressions the way the ocean folds into tide pools. Surprise, then a flicker of recognition that widened into a more practiced fear. He turned and the polite smile he had used all night hardened, as if I'd interrupted a script. "What are you doing here?" she asked, the question carrying that peculiar blend of accusation and innocence that people use when they're caught between roles. I could have screamed, could have flung accusations like broken glass. Instead, I put the house key on the coffee table and slid the apartment key across it. I held his gaze and said quietly, almost tenderly, "You dropped her home." The sentence, small and precise, felt bigger than either of us. He wanted to be indignant, to claim I had no right, but his voice stuck between the polite civility he had practiced and a sudden, thin panic. She faltered, searching my face for the man she married and finding a stranger who had learned how to read the margins of her life. The apartment felt suddenly very small, like a pocket you reach into and find only the things you left there yourself. He collected his dignity like a coat and left it on the chair. She tried to explain in the way people do. Half-truths rerouted timelines, the mythology at work, but the keys on the table were a stubborn chorus no explanation could harmonize. I didn't demand a confession. I didn't ask for details that would have been cruel without purpose. I asked for one thing, that she come home and face what had been set in motion. She moved as if her feet had been unmoored, then stopped, the old weight of habit settling on her shoulders.